But this is really the problem as to why that a lot of different kinds of anarchists and libertarians say that Ancoms are not really anarchists, at least not in the ethical and original sense of the word, anyways. It is because they do, by the end of the day, believe in the coercion that, in this case, being intimidating business owners out of their private property, or even if it comes to it, completely just going violent and completely jacking ownership of it from them.
So I would answer that by saying I don't think that fighting for your freedom or fighting for liberty is authoritarian. I think that that is exactly the opposite. I think it's fighting tyranny. I
Well,
think that it's
I
fighting authoritarianism. And I think that violence can be used as a tool for good and for evil. And I would prefer that it was used for good.
well, I don't believe that that is you fighting for your own freedom. I believe that is you fighting against another person's freedom, that being their private property ownership over their business. So you think it's because of the hierarchy that you're supposing with capitalism as to why that it is not libertarian? Because there is a hierarchy that does exist, therefore it is not libertarian.
To a certain degree, right? Now, when we're talking about hierarchies, there are a lot of different ways that we can define hierarchy and talk about that. There could be natural hierarchies that form, such as in the case of building a house. I use this example a lot. If you have one person that knows how to build a house better than everybody else, right? They've built a lot of houses
Mm-hmm.
before. Their knowledge and experience could be looked at as a type of hierarchy. We get into a lot of arguments on Twitter about whether or not it is or it isn't, but let's use those words for now. If that's the
Yeah, like
case,
say for example, there is like the main architect who like done most of the planning out of how that the house was going to be built, and he's telling people what to do, and then there's like all the little grunt laborers that are following his leadership, you know.
to some degree, right? I think that every worker that's within the project knows their job better than another person that isn't doing their job, right? And each one of those workers that are within that project are going to be just as important as anybody else. So,
Well, yeah, perhaps. I mean,
yeah,
the let's assume that the architect does not know everything about how to properly mix concrete, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or they're not proficient. They don't have the muscle memory to be able to install siding or roofing or ductwork or whatever. But in any case, there's going to be probably one person that knows a little bit more than other people. So we're going to defer to that person's knowledge in the process of building that house. But at the end of the day, that hierarchical structure that was formed arose spontaneously, and we allow it to dissolve, or we forcefully dissolve it when we go on to move to a different project. So the person that was in charge of the house or the building process of the house doesn't also have the ability to be in charge of the state or the city or even a local garden, right? Because those are not overlapping things.
It would depend on how they manage to get in possession of the land in which that the garden exists, or whatnot. But say that let's take this further and say that the architect runs his entire construction company, and all those little grunt laborers, they are hired by him. Like he is the main big boss of them. He gets paid first up front for a little house building project and for all the house construction projects, and then he diversifies that payment out to all the different workers and getting the materials for those workers in order to work on the house and so forth. You think at that point that that is an unjust hierarchy and therefore it should be forcefully dissolved?
Yeah, so actually, what that creates is a couple of things. It definitely does create an unjust hierarchy because there's one person that's able to use the labor of others to profit. But you also have the Marx's version of exploitation when you enter into this sort of situation, which is the extraction of surplus value from labor, all of the profit that a capitalist makes over and above the resources, labor, materials, and overhead that a project is worth, right? So, for instance, when I was working in construction, I'm a construction worker by trade. I would get billed out as a first year at
Well,
about $10 an hour, but my employer would be charging the people that were basically being billed out to $100 an hour, not including labor and overhead. or sorry, not including materials and overhead.
So this is the point that I heard you mention on Nate's live stream when he interviewed you, and this is the point that you started defining. Like he asked you, "Is taxation is theft?" And you said yes, and also let me go mentioning about labor as well and how that is theft. And you said essentially, like you are right now saying as well, that wage labor is theft in your belief, correct?
Yeah, wage labor is like I said, it's a couple of things. It's theft, it's extortion, it's coercion. And if you're forced to work for somebody else because there's no other places to work, or you are compelled by your
Where
hunger
is
or
the
your
force?
inability to move, then I would call that wage slavery, which is very similar to actual slavery. So I'd say that it's a lot of different things.
Where is the force that the manager was applying to you to keep on working for them, or else suffer by the chain or gun that I own?
Yeah, and but that's the thing, right? Is you can have direct or indirect coercion or violence. I would say that direct violence is not any less or any more evil or coercive or damaging to the individual than indirect forms of violence, right? If you starve a person and say either you work for me or else I'm not going to give you any food, right? You're not directly harming that person with physical violence, but you are extorting them to force them to work for you.
I would completely disagree.
Oh, why?
Like, why?
Yeah.
Because the idea that we as humans we need resources to live, it is not the fault of the business owners that is set up within our anatomy and whatnot. Like I would say definitively that a person telling you, hey, either work for me or else suffer my 9 mil, or I got you held yanked by the chain or whatever, that is in fact considerably a lot worse than a person saying, hey, do this or else I'm gonna have to let you go and diversify my resources, my money that I'm paying to you in a different way, which I would call that even not unethical at all, honestly.
So you would say that physical violence in the moment is worse than physical violence that takes a long period of time to happen?
I
Is that
wouldn't
what
even
you're saying?
call it physical violence. I mean, it's not like they're the ones causing the physical violence.
Why not? If you were a king and you owned all of the
I mean,
resources
they
in the
don't have control
land,
of your stomach.
well, no, but if you were a king and you had control over all of the resources of the land, right, and you forced your peasants to work for you, those peasants would then be unable to receive any of the things that you didn't give them unless you decided to give them, right? So,
Sure,
do you think that that is an okay system?
well, I find that not really equivalent. I mean, sure, it's
How is
almost
it not
it sounds
equivalent?
like that you're almost talking about a feudal system in which that there is a one person that owns almost everything and almost almost does force them to keep on working, or else hey, get kicked out of the kingdom or whatever else the scenario that you might concoct. Um, I find it
Sure,
not
but what's
equivalent.
the
I find it not equivalent mostly because of the fact that there are multiple businesses that you could go to, not just one that you have to go to.
what's the difference between having one slave master and having many? Being able to choose which master you work under doesn't necessarily make that slavery any less palpable or any less terrible to the individual's freedom.
Except I would not call that slavery, even because again they are not forcing you to stay working for them.
But you're
You still
compelled by
have your options. You still have your rights to
but
expand on your
you
options.
may have your options, right? You may. That's true. If you have capital and the ability to leave a job, then sure you do have options. But if you're compelled by your hunger or unable to move from one job to another because there's a lack of jobs in that area, or because your skills aren't transferable, or because leaving that job would mean that you would endure undue hardship to yourself and your family, I would say that that is exactly the same thing.
I
Yeah.
got two questions, if I may. So, essentially, within a gift economy, everybody is provided the essentials of society without needing to work or trade for them, like food, shelter, clothing, etc.
So within a gift economy, every job that needs to be performed in that economy to continue the economy, keep the economy in operation, would need to be still done by people, right? So we would just determine who wants to have what job, and if it's a job that they really like, even better. If there are jobs that people don't really want to do, like garbage collector or scrubbing septic tanks, then we could find different ways that we could incentivize those people to do those jobs. Um,
I
so
mean, that's kind of what capitalism does with its monetary system, etc.
sure. Yeah, but we would find different ways, right? Because we fundamentally don't think that personally enriching yourself benefits the rest of society. So we want to find ways that we can incentivize people to enrich the rest of society while also improving their own condition. So if you come up with some sort of amazing invention or something like that, the community is going to look at you as being someone that is really important and really essential, and we're going to give you like first class tickets to on an airplane, or you're going to be able to be the first one in line at the movie theater. These sorts of things. There are other ways to incentivize people to do certain jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with money at all. And I think that that's what we need to be focusing more on rather than individually profiting, because
Well,
once people are individually profiting, then they will inherently forego mutual aid and mutual benefit and the benefit of all society so long as they personally enrich themselves.
Well, how is that sort of incentivizing structure that you set up there supposed to be? How's it going to be enforced so that you make sure that the hardest working person is like the first in line to see a movie or to board an airplane with their airplane ticket and so forth? How is that sort of thing going to be made sure that the hardest working person like gets put up front and just prevent like some other shitbag who did not really do as much but still thinks that they want to more higher prioritized as opposed to the harder working individual?
Sure. And that's a great question. And I want to stress that it's not about the hardest working person. Uh, Somebody that works really, really hard might have the ability to work really, really hard, really long hours, where other people that are disabled, that are elderly, and that sort of thing just cannot. And that doesn't mean that those people should be given more of more of an incentive than other people that are unable to do those certain things. So as a community, we can all come together and we can look at everyone within that community and decide for ourselves who we think deserves to have whatever it is, the first choice of sandwiches or the first whatever, like the limo rides or whatever. That's something that would be able to be determined within a community basis.
JC Armitage asks also, how exactly would you enforce collective ownership without a monopoly on arbitration, aka an owner class, air quotes?
The collective ownership of the means of production would be enforced by all of the people who work with those means of production. So I think that when we have private ownership of the means of production, that's actually something that has to be forced on other people. If you were to go to a bunch of free artisans and free workers that didn't have any bosses or anything like that that were telling them that they needed to share their profits with somebody that wasn't working, I don't think that there would be that in any kind of rational system. So I think that we actually, by that question, have the cart before the horse. The system of private property is what's being forced on people, whereas collective ownership of the means of production and ownership of the things that you produce personally is actually the default state.
Well, let's say if in Ancomistan that somebody did decide to buy their own piece of property, and I don't know, they managed to produce this special product that no one else was able to. I mean, it might be similar in some ways to other products being made, but they're making some special product and they're able to get to a position of where that they start hiring people to help them work and produce that product. What would you do about that private business owner who ended up somehow to finding a private business within Ancomistan? How would you handle that guy?
So we have the idea, well, at least most anarcho-communists, not all, but most of us agree that we should probably have some sort of set ideals and beliefs that we adhere by and we all collectively agree to. So if we collectively agree that there should be no personal profit, that there should be no private ownership of the means of production, and somebody is able to...
In my rhetorical situation right here, there is a person who ends up disagreeing with that with that mindset, with that worldview.
Yeah, so if there is the case that there is a person that does that, and somehow they produce this widget that is essential to everybody, and he's forcing people to work for him, there would be no governmental system that would stop the people from just taking his property away from him and redistributing it.
So basically, mob rule. The mob comes in and hangs him up by his toenails for daring to hire anybody.
No, actually, I would say that that's going directly against the collective agreements that everybody agreed to, right? So if we have a collective agreement that we're not going to have a system that's based off of exploitation and based off of wage labor and that sort of thing,
No, no,
and
no.
somebody tries to enforce those things, then we would be all within our rights 100% to fight for our freedom and to fight for our liberty and to make sure that those things were collectively owned and not privately.
I'm a little bit. I do not know if I'm confused by what you said, or you're confused by what I said, or both. But the private business owner, if they go hiring someone else, the way that you would want that put a stop to is have the mob get out their torches and pitchforks and forcefully seize their land from them and give out some kind of punishment for daring to come up with a private business of some sorts.
We don't have to punish them. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm going to throw somebody up against the wall, but they're absolutely not going to be able to own all of the means of production that everybody should be owning collectively.
Well, they don't own all the means of production.
Or a portion that is necessary. How about that?
A portion within their business more specifically. I mean, obviously, there's all those other individual artisans that own their own means of production, but there's this business owner who is like his own independent island of sorts. I use the word island loosely. That is not really... not associating with anybody really except for his one or two employees that he does not pay in, I guess, a way that you or other Ancoms find sufficient. But because, I just find this completely... I find this about as unethical as the government coming in to take people's private property or even personal property like their home or their gun for self-defense, etc. Because it's still is some kind of a force being put on somebody for doing something ultimately that there's no wrong done. I mean, the worker in the scenario that I brought up here, the worker was consensually designed to work for the business owner within Ancomistan, to be working for them for a certain wage. But to be putting a halt to that, I just it's baffling to me as to why that anybody would want to put a stop to that. I mean, both parties, the worker and the business owner, they're in agreement with each other, so what's wrong with that?
Nothing. If they both are in agreement with that and they aren't part of the federation, that's what we call it, is a federation. If they're not a part
as opposed
of
to Ancomistan.
Yeah, well, we can probably put whatever name we want to it, but yeah, it's usually referred to as a federation. And if somebody was not a part of that federation and they didn't have any collective agreement within that federation, and they were operating on, like you say, an island or something like that, that isn't a part of the whole thing, we would.
Well, I was using island as a metaphor, just to be clear, not a literal island.
If you use it as a metaphor, or we could even use it as like an actual island or a separate state or whatever you want to call it, where you've created your own borders, then that's a fundamentally different thing, right? We want to liberate the people that are within that country, but if those people don't want to be liberated, we also can't force them to liberate themselves. And that's the idea behind it, is we want them to liberate themselves and give them the opportunity to do so.
Let me add a little bit more annotation to my rhetorical situation here. They do not live in a different country. They live in the same country as this Ancom Federation right here. But they just somehow were able to, because it's anarchist, as you say, there is like nobody like keeping a watchful eye out on them 24/7, and they were able to find this business, get some people hired under their wing to help produce whatever it is that they produce, and then finally they get found out, and the Ancom Federation, they decide, let's get a mob and put a stop to this. Let's take their land that they're doing business on from them and stop this consensual agreement that is happening right here.
If it's a consensual agreement, we're talking about a different thing, right? If it's a consensual agreement. And if it is, right, then it goes fundamentally against the Constitution, if that's what you want to call it, that we've already outlined within that federation. So if you go against the Constitution and you want to secede from that federation, right, that's within the community's ability to do so. And they can operate however they want, right? But at the same time, as a liberatory force, right, we wouldn't be looking at the workers that work within that now separate, because you would have to inherently be separate from the federation to operate in that way, right? So we would no longer look at that federation as being part of our system. We would look at that as being a owner and an owner class and a worker class, and we would want to liberate those workers. If the workers were unwilling or unable or undesired liberation for whatever reason, I don't know why they would, then or if there were a bunch of other countries that were preventing us from being able to expropriate the resources that somebody was taking and holding in control of other people, then we would have to find a way to agree to use their resource, whatever the fuck it was that they had, this magic widget, in a way that is equitable for everyone, right? So if that means using some sort of foreign currency to be able to purchase this thing, then we would, as a collective, find a way to do that. But there are many different ways to go about doing that sort of thing. But if you're within the federation, right, and you as an individual business owner are trying to own and control a certain portion of the means of production and enforce labor, and enforce wage labor, then you are going against that federation. You're going against the rules and ideas that we've created in the first place. You're going against the Constitution. So then we would fight that.
A couple of things. First off, you said you don't know why they'd want to do that, referring to somebody working for someone else for a wage. I mean, perhaps they have a bit of an ethical understanding as to why that is, and how it is ethical. That might sound circular, but whatever. I personally know somebody, at least, who explained fully that they end up working a 60 to 70 hour work week, and they are fully advocating of capitalism, and they are just understanding that they are consenting to. I think they work 2 jobs too. This particular person I'm referring to, and he completely agrees with that and understands it. So that would be how I would address that statement of yours a little bit earlier in your monologue, and I'm using word monologue not in a berating way, by the way. And also, you mentioned that in the Ancom Federation, there is like a business and there is a business owner and a worker who are consensually agreeing to this work contract, that the worker is going to work XYZ shift and do XYZ duty, and the business owner is going to pay them this and maybe give them some other benefits for that matter. You say that might be consensual, but how is that any different from employment nowadays within our modern day society in America and Canada, etc.?
Well, it basically goes back to what I was saying before, where I was using the allegory of slavery, right? Some people can agree and completely think that the slavery that they live within is justified, and they can think that it's an agreement that they are coming to willingly. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still slavery. The same thing goes when it comes to wage labor. Or the extraction of surplus value from labor. At the end of the day, that is a definitional term where we're talking about exploitation of that person's labor. And we would find that in the Federation to be abhorrent and hopefully against the Constitution that we've laid out. So I think that it is wrong in both cases, right?
Okay.
I don't think that in Ancomistan, right, or the Anarcho-Communist Federation, that there should be any wage labor. And if we all collectively agree that there should not be wage labor, then we would fight that, just like we collectively agree now, even if we weren't to have a state, that there shouldn't be slavery. So if we seen slavery within our country, we would stop it now. Just like if we seen wage slavery in a future anarchist society, we would stop that as well.
So you keep on bringing up you keep on invoking slavery and saying that there are some cases in which the slaves thought they were in agreement, but I would say that they were slaves outside of their agreement. It doesn't matter whether or not that they agreed as to whether or not that they be slaves, because by definition they were being forced, and not just forced but also completely outright owned by their slave owner, their slave holder, etc. That would be how that's different from an employee. Like an employee, I for example am not owned by my am not owned by my manager, by my boss, etc. The people who work over at Walmart, they're not owned by their managers, their boss, or whatever. The small mom and pop shop down the road, they do not literally own their employees that they hire, neither for that matter as well. So that's how I would say that the differentiation is between slavery and regular milquetoast employment that happens in the modern Western world.
So basically, what you're alluding to is the difference between, like we were talking about before, somebody directly abusing somebody and somebody indirectly abusing somebody, right? When we're talking about the rulership or ownership of a one class versus another, when we're talking about slavery there, or feudalism for that matter, there is one person you can look to: the master, the king, right? But in capitalism, we've abstracted those masters to be many masters, right? But as far as I'm concerned, I don't care if it's one master, two masters, 1,000 masters, or you get to pick your masters. At the end of the day, you're still being owned and controlled by another person, which is, by definition, anti-libertarian, right? It's anti-liberty. No one should own or control another person.
I still completely reject the whole statement that they are literally owning those people. I don't see how that in practice is such.
You don't have to literally own someone. You can rent them.
Well, the literalness of the ownership is what defines it by definition as slavery. I mean, I'd hate to pull out the dictionary definition here, but for at least a baseline, anyways, from DuckDuckGo. The condition in which one person is owned as property by another and is under the owner's control, especially in involuntary servitude. So, that's where that I'm going to put my stake in the ground and say of how that it is definitively not slavery. To call it such is completely hyperbolic.
But here's the thing, right, is that you can say that a slave can go and become a slave voluntarily, right? And then all of a sudden, now it's not slavery.
Yeah, if they borrow from them, from their slave owner.
Pardon?
Yeah, if they end up borrowing and getting in debt with their slave owner, that's the closest thing that I can think that they be voluntarily getting into slavery.
Sure, but I wouldn't consider the difference between renting someone and owning someone to be wholly, completely opposite of one another. I would say that owning someone in the form of chattel slavery is absolutely worse than wage slavery. But whether or not it's worse doesn't mean that it's good or mean that it's something that I want to base my society around, right? And as far as somebody being in an agreement to do those sorts of things, you can think that you are in agreement to do all kinds of things. You can be forced to believe, or you can, be manipulated to believe that you are agreeing with that thing. But at the end of the day, that, like you said, it doesn't change the fact that it's slavery. And I would say that I would extend that to say it doesn't change the fact that it's still wage slavery.
Well, I'd completely disagree, because you and I are obviously working with two entirely different definitions of slavery. I consider it as strictly as literally owning somebody. You consider it as I don't know, because they feel like that they have no other choice but to take up a job.
No. I would say that you and I actually agree on what slavery is. I just think that we disagree when it comes to wage slavery, because you see the abstraction of that ownership as instead of being direct ownership, as being something fundamentally different, where I see it as being a rental agreement. You rent somebody out their labor for a certain amount of time, just as a feudal lord would back during feudalism, or just as a slave owner would. The only difference being is that now this person has the ability to choose whatever master they want, but they still have to choose a master. I don't see that as fundamentally a different thing. I see it as a different form of the same thing.
I can I guess meet you halfway and say, as far as renting goes, at first I was thinking to myself, I would not put it that way, but then at the same time, just because somebody is renting something does not mean that they are literally owning something. Like the apartment that I'm living in right now, I am renting it out, but at the end of the day, if I am being rowdy and obnoxious and becoming a disturbance to the residents or even to the manager, or I mean, I guess in theory, if there was not so many laws and regulations, they could even arbitrarily kick me out for whatever reason that they want. It's just because I'm renting this out does not mean that I actually have the final say and ownership of this property. Just in the same way that an employee, they go renting out their time or renting out their time to the owner or the business owner, excuse me. But at the end of the day, they do have the final say over themselves within our modern day economy here, and they can quit if they really want to, if they such desire so. But to bring this back, though, that still doesn't mean that it is slavery, though.
Well, like I said, it's not slavery as in chattel slavery. I would say that, like I was saying before, it's wage slavery, which is the difference between renting and owning somebody.
It's not really slavery of any kind.
That's the definition that I used for it, right? So, well, we can call it whatever you want, but
I take it that when you say that you're a revolutionist, that means that you are in support of violent revolution in order to overthrow the current capitalist society that we have. That includes taking away all private property from their appropriate business owners.
So that's a complicated. That's a complicated question, right? Like,
right,
I don't endorse violence. I don't endorse the idea of violently overthrowing a country or anything like that. But many anarcho-communists like Peter Kropotkin and others definitely have endorsed the idea of expropriation and the violent overthrow of the current system.
But you're not like you would not call yourself some kind of Marxist Leninist of where that you want to like do some bourgeoisie revolution, though. Am I getting your assumption there correct? Your belief correct, I mean?
Yeah, so no, I don't think that doing a violent revolution through the use of like whatever they want to call it, a dictatorship of a proletariat, and then taking all of our enemies and throwing them up against the wall and murdering them all and all of these sorts of things. I don't think that any of that is useful. I think that what we need to do is, well, I'll put it to you this way. The means that you use to achieve your object soon themselves become your object, right? So if your means of achieving a revolution are violent and terrible and it could kill people and you're putting them up against the wall and it turns into essentially totalitarianism, then that's what your revolution will be.
But in your, I'm not trying to be snarky or anything, Aaron. But in your point of view, there's like this massive injustice that is happening throughout our entire society, and that is this massive wage theft through people being hired and whatnot. So doesn't that justify violence in your point of view, though?
Like I said, I never endorse violence on my channel, right? But as far as I'm concerned,
I mean, I guess I am putting you in a little bit of a unfair hotspot here, considering that we're on YouTube, where it's all like advocacy of violence is not allowed, etc. So, I don't know, sensitive topic.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, exactly. So, yeah, like I said, the idea is in anarcho-communism that the expropriation of goods from the expropriation of the means of production from the capitalist class is inevitable because we need to take back what is, essentially belonging to everybody. So through that, we know that they won't give it up without a fight, and we don't want to have a fight. But if they try to fight us, right, us as in the historical anarcho-communists, then we'll fight them back, right?
So I guess the question is, what is the method that you want to take in order to prevent this, this massive amount of wage theft and, worker and labor exploitation that is happening, and What will you do to prevent that, and also take away the private property, the private business property that these, business owners have?
I think that through collective organizing and unionization, and the spreading of class consciousness through practical methods that actually teach people through realistic and real achievements, that we can take back those things as a collective force, right? For instance, the people all within a business would unionize, they would learn about class struggle, and then they would say, oh, well, you know what, this is an unfair situation, we're going to take back this business, it's going to be ours now. That's basically the way I envision it. So, and the same thing would happen with the government, the same thing would happen with public enterprise, and so forth and so on. The collective unionization of people coming together and changing the way they think about things, so they realize and finally see that they are being fucked over, and they take back all of that shit that they had stolen from them.
Okay, so it's not a revolution in the traditional sense of a Marxist-Leninist or bourgeoisie sort of, or the Bolshevik. Why did I say bourgeoisie earlier? I just noticed that I said bourgeoisie revolution a little bit earlier. Complete and utter fuck up on my part. I meant Bolshevik revolution, everybody. Bolshevik was the ideological group that wanted to, do the revolution against the czars and the Russian Empire at the time, and create the Soviet Union, and take away private property, etc., etc. Bourgeoisie, that was the rich people that the Bolsheviks were fighting against. So completely my fuck up right there. But you're not advocating for a traditional revolution in that sort of sense. But say, for example, within a business that you, Aaron, and all of your comrades, all your Ancom comrades, end up convincing at least half the people within this given business that, hey, what's being done to you is unethical and should be put a stop, and they start protesting in some method or another, and they start, I don't know, taking some methods to try to take away the private property. Like, they stay on the private property in a stubborn sort of manner. Like, they don't actually conduct any violence in a traditional sense, but they're just being there, bug on the log, and they're refusing to leave at the behest of the manager, who says, okay, you're not one to work, well then you're fired, get out of here, etc. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, escort the manager out of his office and tell him that he can go try to find some other business that'll allow him to exploit them for their labor.
So
or if he wants to, he can continue to work at that business if he's willing to give up all of his power over it and just become a regular laborer like the rest of us.
So what if the bigger business, well, okay, actually we're going to stick to small scale, not large macro scale, but it's a small mom and pop shop, let's say, for example. But what if, say, the business owner, that being like the mom and pop or whatnot, they go noticing that, oh, all these people, they're trying to intimidate me out of my private property, so therefore I'm going to take rash methods to sort of try and take back my private property. Like, I'm going to take out my own firearm or call the police or whatever else, and whoever is like going to keep on doing this sort of intimidation. And I would almost call this more coercion, is this intimidation tactic that you seem to be implying right here. But he takes rash methods like calling the police, getting out his own firearm. Hey, get out of here if you're going to keep on intimidating me on my private property. You would say at that point that those people would have to fight back against them over his private property?
So we could look at this the same way as we would in feudal times going up against a king, right? Eventually, at some point, feudalism was abolished and democracy came into play. And at that time, right, all of those feudal lords and feudal kings that owned all of the land could no longer just arbitrarily own peasants or own slaves or own the land. they had to have they had to hire people and this, that, and the other thing. They had to follow liberal democracy. Same sort of thing when it came to slavery. After slavery was abolished, the people that owned slaves before weren't allowed to just own slaves anymore, right? And people were stopped from owning slaves. I'm positive that the slave owners back in those days, even if they were a small mom and pop slave corporation, they probably really didn't like the idea that their slaves all of a sudden got freedom and liberty. But it's the same situation here. It doesn't mean that it still shouldn't be abolished. It still absolutely should. And we should try to do it as non-violently as possible. And if those mom and pop people want to continue working there, they absolutely should. But their labor should be contributing to the business just like everyone else.
They don't just want to work; they want to have ownership and diversify in that business and so forth. And again, I would contend with the idea that they are slaves, that meager employees within a modern Western civilization is slaves, but refer to past part of the stream as to why and how that contend with that. But to sort of, I want to have like a sort of a shorter answer to this, but say again with the situation of the small mom and pop business owner, they see that their own workers who have been converted to anarcho-communism or whatever, your brand of it at least anyways, and they are being intimidated out of their private property. If they want to reaffirm and reinforce their own ownership over their private property, what should the workers do at that point?
Like if they were to pull out their guns and say, "Get off our property, we're gonna shoot you if you try to take it," kind of thing?
I mean, that's one way of doing it if it gets to that extreme, yes.
I mean, like if that's the case, then that's the situation that I was talking about before. They're unlikely to give it up without a fight. So if the workers and the people within that country, within that federation or within that business believe that they are inherently being fucked over and that they deserve to have the means of production or their freedom given back to them, then they would fight them, right? They would have to fight them. The cost of liberty is eternal vigilance. Just like if somebody was to try to enslave someone else, the person that was being enslaved should try to fight them. They should try to stop that by any means necessary.
Well, I guess this is the point in which that we're at a bit of an impasse. I mean, obviously there was the earlier ethical versus unethical breakdown of all these different practices in this live stream, and I don't feel like going over it again at this point. All I am going to say is that if a person wants to defend their own private property, even if it comes to violence, I fully believe in that. I.e., refer to my passionate anti-rioting position of summer last year.
Like, the same way that you believe that a person should fight to hold on to their private property or business is the same feeling that I think that most anarcho-communists get when they feel like they should be fighting for collective property and for personal property and collective ownership.
I mean, I guess
right? So that same vehement feeling, we feel like we've contributed to the house, to the business, to the community, and we feel like someone is stealing those the labor and everything that we involved ourselves in to create those things. So we would want to, most of us would want to fight that.
So, and this, I'm not going to get into the ethicality versus unethicality of business, ownership right at this second anyways, but this is really the problem as to why that a lot of different kinds of anarchists and libertarians say that Ancoms are not really anarchists, at least not in the ethical and original sense of the word anyways. It is because they do, by the end of the day, believe in the coercion that, in this case, being intimidating business owners out of their private property, or even if it comes to it, completely just going violent and completely jacking ownership of it from them.
So I would answer that by saying, I don't think that fighting for your freedom or fighting for liberty is authoritarian. I think that is exactly the opposite. I think it's fighting tyranny.
Well,
I think that it's fighting authoritarianism. And I think that violence can be used as a tool for good and for evil. And I would prefer that it was used for good.
Well, I don't believe that that is you fighting for your own freedom. I believe that is you fighting against another person's freedom, that being their private property ownership over their business.
Yeah, I mean, like you can believe that. I mean, like we believe different things.